We know from this year's American presidential race that the old rules no longer matter. Political novice Donald Trump is the Republican nominee despite almost daily campaign shocks. Hillary Clinton secured her nomination after an improbably close race against a 74-year-old Jewish socialist from Brooklyn. Strategist Clive Veroni's book, Spin: How Politics Has the Power to Turn Marketing on Its Head, takes a look at the new rules. And he joins us now for more. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, let's get the thesis of the argument you're advancing about this new intersection between politics and marketing out front right away. You've observed this in your work. What is it?
So the thesis of the book is that in the social media world in which we're living, mass marketing as we've known it is dead. And as a result, marketers are having to find new ways of connecting with their consumers. And in my view, the smart ones are turning to the world of politics to figure out how to do that.
Why? What's happening in politics?
So you have to go back in time a little bit to understand the argument, because you have to think about what mass marketing was in the 20th century. If you think about the mass marketing in the 20th century had a symbiotic relationship with mass media. And as mass media, radio, television, newspapers, magazines began to grow and attract bigger audiences, marketers then paid more money to reach those audiences and allowed them to grow, and that became like a self-perpetuating machine. And this machine ran all the way through the 20th century and into the early part of the 21st century, and then ran smack into a wall called the internet and exploded into a billion pieces. Because today, anyone with a smartphone is a potential broadcaster or publisher. So it's no longer the kind of controlled media environment that it used to be. The way I describe it is that marketers are now having to descend from the mountain where they used to broadcast their messages down to a noisy public square, and where lots of people are chattering about their brands and about their business. And the best they can hope for today is to be the loudest voice in the square.
Well, let me tell you about the conventional wisdom as I understood it growing up, and then you can tell me how it's changed. Because once upon a time, you always wanted to, if you were in politics, you wanted to appeal to the middle because that's where all the votes were. And I read your book now, and you tell me that's not where it's at, that it's actually the smaller group at this end and the smaller group at that end of the bell curve that you got to talk to now. How come?
Well, because I think it's also driven by the social media environment where views are being more polarized these days. People are sort of pushing out to the edges of the bell curve.
Let me do a quote from your book, and then we'll do an example from the private sector that mirrors that. What's different this time, you write, is that we have entered an era of highly polarizing public debate. The advent of social media, which feeds on the expression of individual passions, has pushed public discourse to the fringes. There is a hollowing out of the middle ground. And I guess one of the best examples from your book about this is the Tropicana orange juice story. This is a $6 billion company owned by PepsiCo, and they tried to change their logo, and oh my goodness, what happened?
Well, the remarkable thing about Tropicana is it's had this wonderful logo for decades, an orange with a straw in it, which is the shorthand expression of everything the brand stands for: freshness, quality, real orange juice, and all of these qualities embodied in this simple graphic device. Well, they hired a hotshot graphic designer in New York, Peter Arnell, to redesign their packaging. And he decided to get rid of that logo and just replace it with a glass of orange juice on the front of the pack. And his rationale for doing this was that we've never shown the product on the front of the pack before, as if people needed to know what orange juice looked like.
Because they didn't know.
Because they didn't know. And what he ended up doing was creating a package that looked like a generic store brand product, rather than the high quality Tropicana that people were accustomed to buying.
But surely he focus group tested this before doing it.
And this is the point, that in fact they did research, and they found that only a small minority of people objected to this new packaging. And so they were looking at the bell curve. They were taking a bell curve view of the world and looking at the big fat number in the middle, ignoring the few people at the fringes who were the most passionate, who were the most polarized. And it's those people who got most upset when the product came to the shelf.
And said so.
Sales, yes, and sales plummeted by 20% on a $6 billion brand. So they, within weeks, reversed their course, went back to the old package, which is today you can find Tropicana with the orange and the straw. And I'm guessing for many more years, you'll be seeing that on the shelf.
Now, having said that, there are times, you say, when you actually do want to antagonize some of the people who are not part of your base, and I guess Stephen Harper on Earth Day is the best example of that.
Yes, so Stephen Harper, on the very first Earth Day in 2008, I believe it was, this was a big deal. People were dousing lights all over the world for 1 hour as part of Earth Hour. And all over Canada, in fact, they were doing this. Political leaders were doing it. They were hosting, candlelit dinners to celebrate the fact that it was Earth Hour and everyone was turning the lights off for an hour. Well, on Parliament Hill, where they had actually turned the lights off on the Peace Tower, some people down there noticed that on the Prime Minister's office, the lights were still ablaze. And if you looked across the Ottawa River, where you can see 24 Sussex standing grandly on the banks of the river, you could see clearly that all the lights were on the ground floor of 24 Sussex.
How come?
And people were outraged by this. Well, even though you could see it across the river, what Stephen Harper was really hoping for is that that would be seen in Alberta, his home turf, because this was being organized by the World Wildlife Fund, the same people who were aggressively opposed to the oil sands and, calling it the dirtiest oil in the world and so forth. And he knew that if he did anything that supported the World Wildlife Fund and their efforts, it would not be welcomed in Alberta. One interesting statistic, by the way, out of all of this is that during that 1 hour, in most parts of the world where they were observing this, power usage declined, as you can imagine.
Sure.
In Calgary, it went up. So
he knew his base.
He knew what he was doing.
He knew his base. Let me do one more story from the private sector here, and that is the Heinz Ketchup story, right? Heinz gets into trouble because of, well, I'll let you tell the story. And you're basically brought in at the 11th hour and told, you've got 48 hours to help stem the bleeding here. What happened?
It was Heinz baby food.
Baby food, okay.
Baby food. But ketchup is a whole different story, more recent.
Yeah.
But the baby food story was someone had brought out a report saying that Heinz baby food was filled with filler and starch and artificial things. And it was a huge crisis for Heinz. Because as you can imagine, one of the most important things for a parent is the food they feed their children, right? And Heinz needed to respond to this in some way, because if they didn't do it very quickly, their business would seriously decline and would impact their overall brand as well. So they did a kind of war room approach to attacking this problem, including overnight tracking of what people how they were responding to this crisis. And I was running an advertising agency at the time, and we were hired to create an ad which we produced. We conceived, wrote, and produced and put to air in 3 days.
Unheard of.
Yes, unheard of. Nowadays they're doing it faster, by the way. But we put this ad to air, which basically explained that 90% of the products that Heinz makes has no additives and nothing added to it. There were just a few products in the lineup for which this was a problem, and that they were making efforts to change that and to improve their labeling. And we could track day by day as this ad went to air how people's responses changed and how perceptions changed as a result of that advertising. And we managed to turn it around. But we only did it because we acted so quickly. Had it taken us weeks or months to respond, I don't think the ideas would have set in cement, and we would have had much harder time turning people around.
So it reinforces the notion that speed is absolutely urgent nowadays.
Speed is absolutely everything. And during the Clinton years, this phrase that speed kills was invented by James Carville, meaning that you have to be really fast to market with your response to crisis and your response to attacks from the opposition and so forth. And marketers are having to do it now too. This is an age of instant advertising.
Well, Carville clearly did a good job for Clinton and helped him win 2 elections, but the gold standard, I think, for opening up the political campaigns and really tapping into the grassroots was Barack Obama's 2008 run for president. And again, we're going to do a quote from your book here. The Obama campaign sampled 10,000 people a night, every night, for 14 months. This allowed the quants to run a staggering 62,000 computer simulations of the election. Not only had no one ever done this before, no one had even conceived of doing it before. Okay, let's unpack this. First of all, who or what are the quants?
The quants were a bunch of people housed in a basement room in an office building in Chicago who were kind of the data analysts for this campaign. They were drawing in massive amounts of data from all sorts of places, processing it, and helping the strategists behind the campaign to develop their plans and their strategies. And lots of things were, and not a lot of the activity around the campaign was carried out without first testing it through these quants. That was mostly in the 2012 campaign, by the way.
And what has been the implication on politics of having this absolute massive dumping of information every single night that the quants could pick through?
Well, it allowed them to make more actionable changes and to do things that they might not have been able to figure out before. One example is that, sifting through the data, they found out that women between the ages of 40 and 49 who live on the West Coast were kind of obsessed with George Clooney. This might not come as a surprise to anyone, but just sifting through the data, they found this. And during the campaign, what they did was, whenever they needed a little boost of money, they would send out an email blast that went to people saying, if you donate $3, you can have your name entered into a draw for dinner with Barack Obama. And reliably, they could generate $3 million out of a little email blast like that. So what they decided to do was say, if you donate $3, you can have your name added to a list for dinner with Obama and George Clooney. This generated $12 million. So this little insight that came out of the data, if you're wondering, by the way, what dinner with George Clooney is worth, it's about $9 million.
Apparently,
yes. But this little insight about that was gleaned from the data was turned into real cash. And that's the strength of taking lots of data, understanding it, and turning it into actionable insight.
It individualizes the campaign, I guess, in a way that was never done before. Let's, I guess the best and probably most memorable example of Obama's 2008 campaign was that iconic poster, which showed him in a kind of an animated form, and I guess just the word hope underneath. And the misconception over the years has always been, who's the genius inside the Obama campaign who put that thing together? And the answer is,
no one in the campaign put it together. It was put together by Shepard Fairey on his own, an artist working on his own in his studio, came up with this design and put it out there to the world and started selling T-shirts and various other things with this and posters, and then taking the money from that to buy billboards and so to extend the message of this poster. The poster became the single most iconic emblem of the campaign, and even the word hope, I think many people would tell you that was the theme of the campaign, which it was not. It was change, because change you can believe in. But that was the power of advertising executed by someone outside of the campaign.
I'm inferring here that the lesson is, as much as corporations and or political campaigns want to control absolutely every lever at their disposal to make sure they get the message they want out there, there's actually more power in letting go.
Yes.
Is that right?
I think you have to these days have the courage to let go of the reins. But you have to do it in a thoughtful way. I think a lot of marketers are trying to do things like crowdsourcing ideas and doing stuff like that, most of which have been disastrous. I think you have to recognize that marketers now exist in this noisy public square where everyone's talking about you, and you've got to engage with people in such a way that they want to talk about your brand positively, not negatively.
That's the risk, right? That once you relinquish the levers of control, you certainly put yourself at the mercy of people who may want to do as much damage to you as good.
Exactly.
So what do you do about that?
Well, this is why I say the political world is where the lessons are to be learned, because politicians have always lived in the noisy public square. They've always had to have their voices heard above the noise from other political parties, from special interest groups, from the media, and they've had to be heard above all that din. And so, the book is really about what are the techniques for doing that, and how do we raise the bar and raise our voices in a way that people want to hear us, and we still are able to engage with the other voices.
It's all there in Spin, How Politics Has the Power to Turn Marketing on Its Head. Clive Veroni has been our guest. Thanks so much for coming in, Clive.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.